Professor Arkin, you say that it's easy to get humans to attach to robots. How's that?
It's very easy. It's been observed by psychologists such as Clifford Nass at Stanford University in his book The Media Equation that not only can humans attach to perhaps robots, but to any form of technology. We've noticed that people fall in love with their machines, whether they be automobiles or televisions or iBos. There have been studies shown. Again, iBos is a robot dog manufactured in the recent past by Sony Corporation.
Yes.
People develop strong bonds with those particular systems, and it's been studied scientifically and proven in many cases to be therapeutic, especially for elder people in old age homes, as we say in the US.
The knowledge about this attachment is used by the computer industry, isn't it?
In certain cases, yes, and it does pose significant ethical questions.
In what cases? Could you give us a couple of examples?
Well, maybe not a couple. Again, the whole notion of, again, iBo, for example, the question is how do you design a robot that could potentially be a human companion?
Yes.
Not just the computer industry, but perhaps basic science. There's
Yes.
projects in Europe, such as Cogniron, many in Japan, in some cases dealing with humanoid robots
Yes.
that are looking very closely at how we can make people feel comfortable and at home
Yes.
with robotic systems instead of afraid of them, which is so typical of the Western cultures.
Yes. It's also a question of learning to communicate with robots, isn't it? It's easier if you perceive the robot as another being to give instructions to the robot, isn't it?
That's correct. There's a whole field of human-robot interaction. The first international conference was held on that about 2 weeks ago as well, which studies that particular phenomena. There was also a Japanese scientist named Mori who described something called the uncanny valley, which talks about how there is a point where robots don't quite look human, where humans are repulsed by them and become afraid of them. And if you go past that point, then they will start to treat them like human beings.
They're too close to humans. They're like zombies or something.
That's exactly correct, where you're not quite close enough. And so the issue is, how do we get past that uncanny valley?
Okay. You don't like the notion of regarding such a robot as a slave. Why is that?
That's a very good question, and in many ways, not all my colleagues agree with me on that particular subject. Slavery, the whole notion of slavery is bad for humanity. As far as the robot goes, I don't care. You can do what you want with that particular robot unless it does something detrimental to mankind. It is my view that human beings have struggled long and hard to get far away from the notion of slavery, which is still a problem in certain places even today. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we start thinking of things that look like humans as slaves, the likelihood of us looking at each other as slaves becomes more and more possible.
So you want to give to the robots some rights or something?
No. Actually, like I say, I don't believe the robots necessarily have to have rights. But if a human being views a robot
Yes.
as something that is at least at some level equivalent to a human,
Yes.
the question is, should it be treated
Yes.
by that human being in some level that is equivalent to a human? Not for the robot's sake, but for the people, the observer's sake as well. Many people have recognized that if you see things in the world that are bad and detrimental, that can change your own personality. Mm-hmm. And what my concern again is on humanity, not for the machinery at all.
Okay. So the consequences of this observation of yours is not to stop developing robots with human-like traits. It's just to take another attitude towards those robots.
That's correct. I believe these robots should be viewed more as peers or partners, as domestic assistants, if you will, and you should treat them civilly. Even robots, soft robots, for example, like HAL, in 2001, which may be a bad example because it didn't turn out too well in the end, was treated politely.
Yes.
And how would we have thought if the commander of the ship was just barking orders at that robot, which was polite at every moment back? I think we will end up losing our own civility towards each other if we start losing our civility towards devices that seem to look like us as well. So again, it's for humanity's sake, not for the robot's sake that I'm concerned.
But nevertheless, it seems like you envisage a future very much like the ones we meet in many science fiction movies, where, for instance, a robot can be on trial, etc.
Well, that's an interesting question. And I don't think it's necessarily the robot should be on trial. It may be the designer of the robot should be on trial. For example, at this point, I'm more concerned with children as a model. So suppose your child does something, a very young child does something very bad. Where does the responsibility vest? How much vests in the parent of that child? If you bought that child a gun, for example, and you let the child go out and play with it, and some irreparable harm came because of that.
Yes.
Whose fault is that? Is that the child's fault,
Yes.
or is that the parent's fault under those sets of circumstances? Those kinds of analogies seem more applicable to me.
Okay. In Cogniron, in Toulouse, what is your field of research there?
Well, I'm not actually directly involved in Cogniron as much as an observer associated with that particular project. I am currently on leave at Toulouse, and I have just been involved in assisting with the reviews, but I am not actively doing the research on that project per se.
But that project is very much about these things we're talking about making robots act politely and humanly, etc., isn't it?
It's concerned with a cognitive robot companion. Some of the most interesting work that I've seen from that deals with actually how do we make sure that human beings are safe among domestic robots. There's some very interesting work going on in motion planning, which is concerned with ensuring that the robot doesn't scare somebody when it comes into the room, so that it doesn't inadvertently sneak up behind them, so that you understand where the human is looking and make sure the robot introduces itself safely into the visual field. Very important aspects from human-robot interaction.
And that the robot don't have emotions that are understandable for humans.
I'm not as sure how much emotional research is going on in that project. Oh, emotions, that's right. Emotions are understandable, that's correct. And one of the goals of that is to make sure that people can understand why the robot is behaving the way it is. It's easier for a designer to understand what it's doing, but when you start introducing them to the general public, you want to make sure that they will feel comfortable about those systems. And understanding why it's behaving the way it's behaving is very important in that context, correct.
But this is also your field of research, isn't it?
Not so much the motion planning side of things. There's wonderful researchers all around the world who focus on that. I focus more on the behaviors that create the kinds of motions that you say. But I am concerned certainly with human-robot interaction. And that's indeed what led me most recently into robot ethics.